Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the most inspiring and life-changing stories. Today, you are about to hear a story that is not just about success. It is about struggle, pain, determination, and the power of never giving up. This is the story of a young boy who had nothing. Not a single penny, not a comfortable home, not even enough food to eat. A boy who lost everything at a young age, who had no one to help him, and who faced hunger, loneliness, and endless hardships. But that boy did not accept his fate. That boy refused to give up. He walked for 2 years, covering a distance of 470 kilometers, with no money, no food, and no shelter. He faced storms, hunger, and exhaustion, but he never stopped. That boy later became the founder of the world's most powerful luxury brand, Louis Vuitton. How did he do it? How did a homeless, hungry boy become the creator of a billion-dollar empire? How did he turn his pain into power and his struggles into success? Everything in this story is true. Every struggle, every success, and every detail. Watch the full story to truly understand the journey from nothing to ultimate luxury. Trust me, you won't regret it. This story isn't just inspiring. It's a powerful way to improve your English. With engaging storytelling, rich vocabulary, and real-life lessons, you'll learn naturally while enjoying an incredible journey. Now let's begin from the very start. In the year 1821, in a small village called Angers, France, a baby boy was born into a poor family. His name was Louis Vuitton, but life did not welcome him with comfort or wealth. From the moment he was born, he was surrounded by hardship. His father, Xavier Vuitton, was a carpenter, a hard-working man who built furniture and small wooden structures. His mother, Coronne Gaillard, was a hat maker who spent her days sewing hats for local women. They worked day and night, yet their earnings were barely enough to buy food. Louis grew up in a tiny wooden house with a leaking roof and cold, damp floors. Winters in Angers were brutal. Snow covered the village for months, and cold winds made life even harder. There was no heating, no warm blankets, and no comfortable bed. Louis and his family had to survive with whatever they had. At a young age, he learned that life was not fair. He did not have the toys that rich children had. He did not go to school like them. Instead, he spent his childhood helping his father in carpentry, carrying heavy wooden planks, hammering nails, and cleaning sawdust from the floor. His hands were rough, his clothes were torn, and his stomach often remained empty. But Louis was different from other children in his village. Even though he was poor, even though he had nothing, he had something that others did not. A dream. Every day, travelers passed through his village. Rich men and women dressed in fine clothes, carrying large wooden trunks and suitcases. Louis would watch them with fascination. Where were they going? How far were they traveling? Who made those beautiful trunks they carried? He had never seen the world beyond his small village, but his heart longed to know more. He was curious, hungry for knowledge, and desperate for a better life. But fate was not kind to him. When Louis was just 10 years old, his mother fell sick. There were no hospitals in the village, no doctors to treat her. Day by day, her condition worsened. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Louis's mother took her last breath. She was gone. Louis stood by her grave, silent, unable to cry. His world had fallen apart. His father, broken by grief, became distant and cold. He no longer had the strength to take care of Louis. For the first time, Louis felt completely alone. But in that moment of pain, he made a decision. He would not stay in this village forever. He would not accept a life of poverty. He would leave. He would chase his dream. But how? At the age of 13, Louis had no money, no horse, and no food. Paris, the city of dreams, was 470 kilometers away. It was impossible. Or was it? One evening, as the village prepared for sleep, Louis packed a small bag. He had no map, no guide, only a dream. He did not tell his father. He did not say goodbye to anyone. Before the sun could rise, before anyone could stop him, Louis took his first step on the long road to Paris. He did not know what lay ahead. He did not know how he would survive. But he knew one thing: he could not stop. He walked for hours, then days, then weeks. His feet were sore, his body weak. Sometimes kind strangers gave him food. Other times, he went to bed hungry, lying under trees, using his bag as a pillow. He crossed forests, mountains, and rivers. He worked as a farm helper in small villages, earning food in exchange for labor. Rain soaked his clothes, winter winds burned his skin, but he never turned back. He was tired. He was starving, but he was determined. After 2 years of walking, struggling, and surviving with nothing but determination, Louis Vuitton finally arrived in Paris. But Paris was not the magical place he had imagined. The city was massive, filled with thousands of people, carriages rushing through the streets, and markets overflowing with food and luxury goods. The air smelled of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and perfume. Things Louis had never experienced in his poor village. But there was also another side to Paris. The streets were dirty, packed with beggars, thieves, and struggling workers who barely made enough to eat. The reality was harsh. Paris was not a place that welcomed the poor. And Louis had nothing. No home, no family, no money. He stood at the edge of the city, exhausted, his clothes torn, his feet bleeding from the long journey. His stomach growled, but he had no food. For the first time in 2 years, fear crept into his heart. Where would he sleep? How would he survive? The first night in Paris was the hardest. Louis found an empty wooden cart abandoned near a bakery. He crawled inside, pulled his small bag close to his chest, and tried to sleep. The streets were noisy. People laughed, shouted, and horses clattered against the stone roads. Rats scurried around, searching for food, but Louis was too tired to care. He closed his eyes, ignoring the cold wind biting his skin. The next morning, hunger forced him to wake up early. He watched as well-dressed men and women entered bakeries, buying golden loaves of bread and buttery croissants. The smell made his stomach twist in pain. He had no choice. He needed work. Louis walked from shop to shop asking for a job, but every time the answer was the same. No experience, no work, no connections, no chance, no money, no food. Paris was cruel to those who had nothing. Days passed, and Louis grew weaker. He ate scraps from the market, picking up leftover bread from the ground when no one was looking. His body ached. His clothes were dirty. He had never felt so alone. But he refused to give up. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Louis noticed a man struggling to carry a large wooden trunk into a shop. The man was sweating, his hands shaking from the weight. Without thinking, Louis ran forward and grabbed the other side of the trunk. The man looked at him in surprise but said nothing. Together, they lifted the trunk inside. The shop was unlike anything Louis had ever seen. Wooden trunks of all shapes and sizes lined the walls, some covered in leather, others decorated with brass locks and golden initials. It was a workshop, one of the finest in Paris. The owner of the shop, Monsieur Maréchal, watched Louis with sharp eyes. "You're strong for a boy your size," he said. "What's your name?" "Louis Vuitton, sir? What do you want?" Louis took a deep breath. This was his chance. "I want to work." Maréchal raised an eyebrow. "Can you make trunks?" Louis hesitated. "No, sir, but I can learn." The old man chuckled. "Everyone says that, but not everyone is willing to do the hard work." Louis's stomach clenched. He had come too far to be rejected again. "Give me a chance," he said, his voice firm. "I will work harder than anyone else." There was silence. Then Maréchal nodded. "Fine. You start tomorrow. But don't expect money yet. You work, you learn, and if you're good, then we'll talk about payment." Louis bowed. "Thank you, sir." He had done it. He had found a place to work. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, Louis arrived before sunrise. The workshop was freezing. The scent of fresh wood and glue filled the air. Tools were scattered across wooden tables, hammers, saws, chisels, and needles for stitching leather. Louis was assigned to sweep the floor, fetch tools, and clean up after the workers. At first, he didn't mind. He was just happy to be inside, away from the cold streets. But weeks passed, and he was still only doing basic tasks. He wanted to build. He wanted to create. One evening, after everyone had left, Louis stayed behind. He picked up a small wooden panel and began practicing. He hammered, carved, and stitched, imitating the work he had seen during the day. The next morning, Maréchal noticed the piece. He lifted it, examining the clean edges and precise stitches. "Did you make this?" he asked. Louis nodded, nervous. Maréchal didn't smile, but he didn't scold him either. "From now on, you stay after work. I'll teach you." That night, Louis worked harder than ever. He learned how to shape wood, how to select the best leather, how to stitch with perfection. He watched the master craftsmen memorizing their every move. Months turned into years. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was becoming a craftsman, and people started to notice. By the time Louis was 20 years old, his hands were no longer those of a poor village boy. They were the hands of a skilled artisan. He was faster than the other workers, more precise in his craftsmanship, and more creative with his designs. Nobles and wealthy customers began requesting him by name. "I want my trunk made by Vuitton." "That boy makes the finest trunks in Paris." His reputation grew. He was no longer just a poor worker. He was someone valuable. One day, a woman entered the shop. She was elegant, wearing a luxurious silk gown and a pearl necklace. But it was her name that changed everything. She was Empress Eugénie, the wife of Napoleon III, the ruler of France. She was not just another wealthy customer. She was royalty. Her silk gown shimmered under the golden chandeliers of the workshop. Her diamond earrings sparkled as she glanced around, unimpressed by the ordinary trunks lining the walls. But when her gaze fell upon Louis, her sharp eyes narrowed. "Are you the young craftsman they call Vuitton?" she asked, her voice smooth but commanding. Louis swallowed hard. He had worked for years, perfecting his skills, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied, bowing slightly. She studied him for a moment, then turned to Monsieur Maréchal, the workshop's owner. "I need a trunk, but not just any trunk," she said. "I travel often, and my trunks are too heavy, too impractical. I want something elegant yet functional, something no one has ever seen before." Louis's mind raced. This was his chance. If he impressed the Empress, his name would spread through the entire country. But if he failed, he would lose everything. Louis had seen the problems with traditional trunks. Back then, travel trunks were bulky, round-topped, and difficult to stack. They were covered in thick leather, making them heavy and impractical. Most importantly, they were not designed for modern travel. But Louis had an idea, something that had never been done before. He stepped forward, his hands slightly trembling. "Your Majesty, what if I create a trunk that is light, elegant, and stackable?" he said. "A flat-topped trunk, covered in waterproof canvas instead of leather. It will be durable, easy to carry, and perfect for your travels." Silence filled the room. Marechal looked at Louis as if he had lost his mind. No one had ever dared to change the traditional design of a trunk. But Empress Eugénie tilted her head, intrigued. "A flat-topped trunk? Canvas instead of leather?" she repeated. "That is interesting. Can you do it?" Louis's heart pounded. "Yes, Your Majesty. I will create a trunk unlike any other." A small smile played on her lips. "Then do it, Vuitton. Impress me." For weeks, Louis worked day and night. He knew this was his moment to prove himself, not just to the Empress, but to the entire world. First, he designed the frame. Instead of using the usual thick, heavy wood, he chose poplar wood, which was lightweight yet strong. Next, he replaced the traditional rounded top with a flat surface. This simple change allowed trunks to be stacked neatly, making them perfect for long journeys. But the biggest innovation was the material. Instead of using leather, Louis experimented with a waterproof Trianon canvas, a light gray, durable fabric that resisted moisture and stains. It was unlike anything seen before. Days turned into weeks. Louis barely slept. His hands were covered in cuts and glue. He skipped meals, too focused on making the perfect trunk. When the final piece was ready, it was breathtaking. The canvas shimmered under the light, smooth and elegant. The brass locks gleamed, securing the trunk tightly. The craftsmanship was flawless. It was not just a trunk. It was a masterpiece. The day of the presentation arrived. Louis stood in the grand hall of the Empress's palace, his heart pounding. Nobles and high-ranking officials whispered as they glanced at him, unimpressed by the young craftsman in simple clothes. The Empress entered, her gown flowing behind her like water. Her eyes fell on the trunk. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out, running her fingers over the smooth canvas. She inspected the locks, the stitching, the finish. Everyone held their breath. Finally, she looked at Louis. "Vuitton," she said, "this is extraordinary." Murmurs spread through the room. Marechal, who had once doubted Louis, stared in shock. "From now on," the Empress continued, "you will be my personal trunk maker." It was done. Louis had won the trust of the most powerful woman in France. And in that moment, everything changed. The Empress's endorsement was more than just an honor. It was an opportunity. Suddenly, the elite of Paris wanted Vuitton trunks. Aristocrats, politicians, and wealthy travelers all placed orders. But there was a problem. Louis was still just a worker in Marechal's shop. No matter how talented he was, he would always be under someone else's control. He needed to break free. So, after years of loyalty, Louis made the boldest decision of his life. He left the workshop and started his own business. With the little money he had saved, about $1,000 in today's value, he rented a small space in Paris. The shop was modest, with only a few tools and a single workbench, but it was his. He hung a wooden sign outside: Louis Vuitton, maletier, trunk maker. It was official. He was no longer just a poor village boy. He was a business owner. Starting a business was not easy. The first few months were brutal. Louis had no employees, no big factory, no safety net. Every trunk he made was handcrafted by him alone. He worked from sunrise to midnight, barely stopping to eat. And then, disaster struck. A massive war broke out in France. The Franco-Prussian War. The streets of Paris turned into battlefields. Wealthy customers fled the city, factories shut down, businesses collapsed. Suddenly, no one was buying luxury goods. Louis's shop, which had been growing, now stood empty. The orders stopped. The money stopped. He was on the edge of bankruptcy. For months, he fought to keep his business alive. He sold some of his tools, cut down on materials, and worked harder than ever. But no matter how much he tried, he was running out of time. If things didn't change soon, he would lose everything he had built. Then, just when all hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. The war ended. And when peace returned, a new era began. People wanted to travel again. They wanted style, elegance, and innovation. And they wanted Louis Vuitton trunks. Orders flooded in. His shop, which had been nearly abandoned, suddenly became the most talked-about business in Paris. But Louis didn't just rebuild, he expanded. In 1871, he opened a brand new workshop in Agnières, just outside Paris. It was 4 times bigger than his old shop. He hired workers, trained apprentices, and designed new collections. His dream was no longer just a shop. It was an empire in the making. But the world was changing fast. Luxury was no longer just for royalty. It was for the rising elite. While Louis was building his empire in the 80s, his personal life was also changing. He married Clémence Émilie Pariot, a strong and supportive woman who believed in his dreams. She was not just his wife. She was his partner. They had a son, Georges Vuitton, who later expanded the business. But success came at a cost. Louis, obsessed with perfection, spent endless nights in his workshop, barely seeing his family. He missed birthdays, gatherings, and quiet evenings, all while chasing his dream. From the very beginning, Louis understood something most businessmen didn't. If you want to create a lasting brand, you must sell to the rich. But why? The wealthy had power. They influenced fashion, trends, and the desires of society. If aristocrats and high-status travelers used Vuitton trunks, everyone else would dream of owning one too. And there was another reason. Rich customers did not argue about price. They only cared about exclusivity. Louis never tried to sell to the masses. He focused on a few elite clients who were willing to pay top dollar for something unique and handcrafted. This strategy worked like magic. Soon, not only nobles, but also bankers, businessmen, and world travelers started ordering Vuitton trunks. Owning a Louis Vuitton trunk was no longer just about travel. It was a status symbol. Louis Vuitton had built an empire, but his journey ended in 1892 when he passed away, leaving his son, Georges Vuitton, in charge. Before passing away, Louis called Georges to his side and gave him one final lesson. Never sell cheap, never sell to the masses. Our name must always stand for the best. If the world changes, we must change with it, but never lose what makes us special. Georges was young, ambitious, and determined to take his father's vision to new heights. He expanded Louis Vuitton beyond travel trunks, introducing handbags, cutlery bags, and luxury minibars that changed the world of high fashion. As his business grew, copycats appeared. Cheap imitations of his designs started flooding the market. Customers were being tricked into buying fake Vuitton trunks. Louis knew he had to protect his brand. He introduced the LV monogram in 1896 to stop counterfeits, making Louis Vuitton a name that only the wealthy could afford. Under Georges, the brand didn't just survive, it dominated the luxury market. But nothing lasts forever. Georges was aging. The empire was growing too big for one man. The world was changing fast. Automobiles, airplanes, and a new era of fashion were emerging. For decades, Georges had worked endlessly to expand the Louis Vuitton brand. He introduced leather handbags and accessories that became a status symbol. He opened stores internationally, making Louis Vuitton a global name. He protected the brand's exclusivity, ensuring that LV remained a luxury reserved for the elite. But in the 1930s, Georges faced his greatest challenge yet. His health began to fail. Years of stress, constant innovation, and global expansion had taken a toll on his body. By 1936, Georges Vuitton passed away, marking the end of an era. The question now was, who would continue the empire? This was when Gaston Louis Vuitton, Georges' son, stepped forward. Gaston Louis Vuitton had grown up surrounded by luxury, design, and craftsmanship. From a young age, he had watched his father expand the brand, and now it was his turn. But the world was different now. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, had destroyed businesses worldwide. The rise of automobiles and airplanes meant that traditional travel trunks were losing their importance. The fashion industry was changing. People wanted more than just luxury luggage. Would Louis Vuitton survive this new era? Gaston knew that if the company didn't adapt, it would die. So he made bold moves. 1. Expanding beyond travel bags. Under Gaston, Louis Vuitton introduced small leather goods, purses, and accessories. 2. Creating luxury handbags. He focused on high-end handbags that weren't just for travel but could be used in everyday fashion. 3. Innovating in design. He experimented with new styles, making Louis Vuitton more fashion-forward. But before he could push his vision further, World War II erupted, putting everything at risk. During World War II, 1939 to 1945, France was occupied by Nazi Germany. The country was in chaos, businesses were shutting down, and luxury brands were struggling to survive. Gaston Louis Vuitton had to make a choice: either close the business or find a way to keep it running. To survive, Louis Vuitton worked with the German-occupied French government. This was a controversial decision, and for years, this part of Louis Vuitton's history remained hidden. It wasn't until decades later that reports revealed the brand's ties to the Nazi government. But despite the war, Louis Vuitton survived. And when the war ended, Gaston Louis focused on rebuilding the brand's image. But this wasn't easy. After World War II, Europe was in economic ruins. The luxury market was weak, and people weren't thinking about expensive handbags or designer luggage. But Gaston knew one thing: the rich always find a way to stay rich. Even in difficult times, the wealthy elite still wanted luxury. So, Louis Vuitton focused on exclusive, high-quality products that only the wealthiest people in the world could afford. This strategy worked, and by the 1950s, Louis Vuitton was back on top. During this time, Louis Vuitton introduced some of its most famous handbags, including the Speedy bag, designed for fashionable women on the go; The keep-all bag, a stylish modern alternative to traditional luggage. The Noé bag, originally made for carrying champagne bottles in luxury. Louis Vuitton was no longer just a travel brand. It had become a fashion icon. But Gaston Louis was getting older. Who would take the empire into the next generation? By the 1960s, Louis Vuitton had grown into one of the most respected luxury brands in the world. But the world was moving faster than ever. New fashion trends were emerging. The wealthy class was expanding. Competition in luxury was increasing. Gaston Louis knew the company needed fresh ideas. So he brought in his son-in-law, Henri Racamier, to help modernize the business. Henri was a brilliant businessman with a vision. He believed that Louis Vuitton could become bigger than ever. His goal? Turn Louis Vuitton into the most powerful luxury brand in history. And this decision would change everything. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Louis Vuitton was already an established luxury brand, known for its exclusive luggage, handbags, and accessories. But it was still operating like a traditional family business. The world was changing, and if Louis Vuitton wanted to dominate, it needed a new strategy, a new vision, and a new kind of leadership. This was when Henri Racamier stepped in. Henri Racamier wasn't a designer, and he wasn't a traditional businessman. He was a visionary. When he took control of Louis Vuitton, he saw one thing clearly. This wasn't just a brand. It was an untapped gold mine waiting to explode into a billion-dollar empire. But there was a problem. At that time, Louis Vuitton was selling only to a small group of elite customers in Europe. It was respected but not yet a global powerhouse. So Henri made bold, risky moves that would change the history of luxury forever. 1. Expanding to the richest markets. Instead of just selling in France, he pushed into the US, Japan, and the Middle East, places where the wealthiest people in the world were hungry for luxury. 2. Raising the prices. Henri knew one thing. The more expensive an item is, the more people desire it. He increased prices to levels that only the rich could afford. A Louis Vuitton handbag wasn't just an accessory. It was a symbol of status. 3. Luxury shopping experience. Louis Vuitton stores were no longer simple shops. They became palaces of luxury where customers felt special. Every store had private shopping areas, champagne service, and VIP treatment. But this was just the beginning. Louis Vuitton wasn't trying to sell to everyone. The brand targeted the top 1% of the world. The millionaires, billionaires, celebrities, and royalty. This was why they introduced limited edition bags, exotic leather products, and even private made-to-order collections. Some of the most exclusive Louis Vuitton products included crocodile skin handbags. Some LV bags are made from real crocodile leather, which makes them extremely rare and expensive. Prices for these bags start at $50,000 and can go up to $100,000 or more. Python and ostrich skin bags. These bags are handcrafted using python, ostrich, and other exotic skins, making them not just accessories but collector's items. Custom mini bars and cutlery bags. Louis Vuitton even introduced luxury mini bars and cutlery bags for the ultra-rich, designed to be used in private jets and yachts. These items could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Unzippable travel trunks. One of the most iconic LV products is the custom-made travel trunk, which can cost up to $500,000 depending on the customization. But there was one problem. When a brand becomes too exclusive, counterfeiters start trying to copy it. As Louis Vuitton's popularity grew, fake LV bags flooded the market. In the 1980s, knockoff versions of Louis Vuitton handbags were being sold on the streets of Paris, New York, and Tokyo. This was a huge threat to the brand's image. If everyone had a Louis Vuitton bag, it wouldn't be special anymore. So Henri Racamier launched one of the biggest anti-counterfeiting campaigns in history. Louis Vuitton hired special teams of investigators to track down and shut down counterfeit factories. They worked with governments to pass strict anti-counterfeiting laws. They introduced special security features in their products to make them harder to fake. But Henri knew that to truly dominate the market, Louis Vuitton needed to become more than just a luggage brand. So he made a historic move. In 1987, Henri Racamier made a game-changing decision. He merged Louis Vuitton with Moet and Chandon, a luxury champagne brand, and Hennessy, a premium cognac brand, to create LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. This was brilliant because now Louis Vuitton wasn't just a fashion house, it was part of the world's biggest luxury group. With this merger, LVMH controlled dozens of luxury brands, expanded into fashion, jewelry, cosmetics, and alcohol, became the richest luxury company in the world. But Henri Racamier didn't get to enjoy his empire for long. As LVMH grew, a new player entered the scene, a young businessman named Bernard Arnault. Arnault was hungry for power. He saw that LVMH was a golden opportunity, and he wanted to take control. In 1989, he used aggressive business tactics to push Henri Racamier out and took full control of LVMH. This move was controversial, but it made Bernard Arnault the most powerful man in luxury fashion. Once he had full control, Bernard Arnault transformed LVMH into a financial powerhouse. He expanded into new markets like China, Russia, and India. He bought luxury brands like Dior, Givenchy, and Fendi, making LVMH the most powerful fashion group in the world. He introduced super high-end products with prices reaching millions of dollars. Today, under Bernard Arnault, LVMH is worth over $500 billion, making it the richest luxury company in the world. Arnault himself is often ranked as the richest person on earth, with a net worth of over $200 billion. Today, Louis Vuitton represents exclusivity. Owning an LV bag means you've made it in life. Luxury craftsmanship. Every Louis Vuitton product is handmade by the best artisans in the world. A status symbol. Whether it's a handbag, luggage, or a custom minibar, Louis Vuitton is the ultimate sign of wealth. Even after 170-plus years, Louis Vuitton remains the most powerful luxury brand in the world. And it all started with one young man, Louis Vuitton, who had nothing but a dream. Louis Vuitton's story is a lesson in determination, vision, and risk-taking. From a poor boy in a small village to the biggest luxury empire in the world, Louis Vuitton proves that hard work and innovation can change everything. Every step, from handcrafting trunks to creating billion-dollar handbags, was built on excellence and exclusivity. And even after wars, economic crises, and battles for control, Louis Vuitton has stood the test of time. This is more than a brand, it's a legacy.